Step out of the vehicle. Now.
This is not a request.
Officer, you have no reasonable suspicion. This stop is unlawful.
Turn around! Hands on the car! This gets worse!
You are escalating a non-crime and you're doing it on camera.
You're under arrest for obstruction.
No. The dashboard camera of the patrol unit captured the scene in high definition, the timestamp reading 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was one of those quiet, manicured enclaves where the lawns were cut diagonally and the silence was heavy with money. Officer Kyle Branning sat in his idling cruiser, his eyes fixed on a vehicle parked 2 houses down. It was a vintage Jaguar XJ British racing green immaculate and gleaming under the afternoon sun. Inside that car sat a man who had spent the last 25 years reshaping the juvenile justice system of the state, a man whose name was etched on the plaques of 3 different legal aid foundations. But Officer Branning didn't see a pillar of the community or a distinguished jurist. He saw a black man in a car that cost more than Branning's annual salary, parked in a neighborhood where in Branning's estimation he didn't belong. Judge Marcus Thorne checked his watch. He was 5 minutes early. His son Jamal, a 19-year-old sophomore at the State University, was finishing up a study group session for his pre-law ethics class at a classmate's home. Marcus enjoyed these quiet moments. At 58, he carried the weight of hundreds of difficult decisions, placing children in foster care, sentencing violent offenders, giving second chances to those the world had given up on. The silence of the car was a sanctuary. He adjusted the volume on the classical radio station, preparing to wait. He wasn't in a rush. He was a father picking up his son. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. Officer Branning, 28 years old and just 4 years out of the academy, shifted his cruiser into drive. He had received no dispatch call. There was no report of a burglary. There was no bolo be on the lookout for a green Jaguar. There was only Branning's boredom and his deeply ingrained, unexamined bias that whispered that something here didn't look right. He rolled the cruiser forward, the tires crunching softly on the asphalt, and pulled up diagonally behind the Jaguar, effectively blocking it in. He didn't turn on his lights, but the positioning was aggressive, a tactical maneuver designed to intimidate. Inside the Jaguar, Marcus saw the cruiser in his rearview mirror. He sighed, a sound born of fatigue rather than fear. He knew the statistics. He had presided over cases involving racial profiling. He had written opinions on Terry stops and the Fourth Amendment. He hoped the officer would run the plates, see the registration to the Honorable Marcus Thorne, and drive away. But the door of the cruiser opened. Branning stepped out, hitching his belt, his hand resting casually, habitually on the grip of his service weapon. Marcus turned off the engine and placed his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He lowered the window as Branning approached the driver's side, casting a long shadow over the leather interior. "Afternoon," Branning said, though the tone suggested anything but a greeting. He leaned down, peering past Marcus into the back seat, scanning for something. "You live around here." Marcus looked the officer in the eye. He saw the youth, the arrogance, the assumption of authority that hadn't yet been tempered by wisdom. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" "I asked if you lived around here." Branning repeated, his voice hardening. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Porch pirates, car break-ins. You know how it is." "I am waiting for my son," Marcus said evenly, his voice the same deep baritone that had commanded silence in courtrooms for decades. "He is finishing a study session at the Miller residence right there. I'll be moving along in 5 minutes." "I'm going to need to see your license and registration," Branning said, holding out his hand. Marcus didn't move his hands from the wheel. "Officer, with all due respect, I am legally parked on a public street. Unless you have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime, I am not obligated to provide identification. This is a consensual encounter, is it not?" Branning blinked. He wasn't used to people quoting the law manual back to him. Usually people panicked. They stuttered. They complied out of fear. This man was calm, unnervingly so. The rejection of his command felt like a slap to the face. The power dynamic was shifting, and Branning didn't like it. He stepped closer to the window, invading the space. "Look, buddy, you can do this the easy way or the hard way. I'm conducting an investigation. Now step out of the vehicle." "An investigation into what?" Marcus asked, his pulse steady but his mind racing through the legal precedents. Pennsylvania versus Mims, Arizona versus Johnson. "You haven't articulated a crime. Suspicious activity is not a specific offense. I am declining your request to exit my vehicle." "It's not a request," Branning snapped. His thumb unsnapped the retention strap of his holster. "Step out of the car, now." The escalation was irrational, rapid, and dangerous. Marcus knew that moving too fast could get him killed. He also knew that staying in the car might result in the window being smashed and him being dragged out. He made a calculation. "I am going to unbuckle my seatbelt." Marcus narrated his movements slowly. "I am stepping out under duress and in protest of this unlawful detention." Marcus opened the door and rose to his full height. He was a tall man, 6'2", dressed in a tailored blazer and slacks. He stood by the door, his posture upright, dignified. Branning, who was shorter, felt the need to regain physical dominance. He moved into Marcus's personal space. "Turn around," Branning commanded. "Hands on the roof." "I will not," Marcus said. "I am not under arrest. I have not been frisked because you have no reasonable suspicion that I am armed and dangerous. I will stand right here." At that moment, the front door of the house opened. Jamal walked out, a backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing at something a friend inside had said. He looked up and saw the police cruiser, then his father standing by the Jaguar, then the officer with his hand on his gun. The smile vanished from Jamal's face. He froze on the walkway about 20 feet away. "Dad!" Jamal called out, his voice cracking slightly. Branning spun around. He saw a young black male 19 years old wearing a university hoodie and jeans. In Branning's tunnel vision, the backpack wasn't filled with textbooks. It was potential contraband. The situation was spiraling, and instead of de-escalating, Branning fell back on his worst instincts. He drew his taser and pointed it in Jamal's direction. "Stay right there," Branning shouted. "Don't come any closer." "Drop the bag." Marcus moved. It wasn't a threatening move, but it was decisive. He stepped laterally, placing his body directly between the weapon and his son. For the first time, the judicial coolness in his eyes was replaced by a fierce paternal heat. "Put that weapon away," Marcus ordered. It wasn't a request. It was the voice that had sentenced gang leaders and corrupt politicians. "That is a 19-year-old college student. He is unarmed. If you discharge that weapon, you will regret it for the rest of your life." "Back up!" Branning yelled, his adrenaline spiking. He was losing control of the scene. Neighbors were coming out onto their porches. A woman across the street had her phone up recording. "You are interfering with a police investigation." "There is no investigation," Marcus roared back, his voice projecting clearly to the witnesses. "You harassed a citizen, you escalated a non-event, and now you are threatening an unarmed boy. Look around you, officer. You are on camera. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." Branning was shaking now. Not from fear of the man, but from the cognitive dissonance of being challenged so effectively. He couldn't back down. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, to look weak in front of the residents, in front of the suspect. He holstered the taser and grabbed his handcuffs. "That's it," Branning said, rushing forward. "Turn around. You're under arrest." "For what charge?" Marcus asked, not resisting but not helping either. He held his hands out, wrists together, offering them to the officer. "Obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order." Branning rattled off the catch-all charges he used whenever someone failed the attitude test. He grabbed Marcus's wrists, roughly twisting them behind his back. The steel cuffs clicked shut, biting into the skin. Jamal took a step forward, his hands up. Dad, what do I do?" Marcus looked over his shoulder at his son. Jamal, stay calm. Do not engage him. Get in your car. Follow us to the station. Call Attorney Henderson immediately. Tell him I've been arrested for a Fourth Amendment violation and false imprisonment. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Jamal said, tears of frustration welling in his eyes, but his voice steady. Branning shoved Marcus toward the patrol car. Get in, he muttered, pushing the judge's head down as he maneuvered him into the cramped back seat. The hard plastic seat was a stark contrast to the leather of the Jaguar. The car smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. As Branning slammed the door, Marcus looked through the wire mesh. Officer, he said, his voice calm again, deadly quiet. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember exactly how you feel right now, because you have just destroyed your own life. Branning laughed a nervous, jagged sound as he got into the driver's seat. Yeah. Tell it to the judge. I am the judge, Marcus whispered to the empty air of the cage. The ride to the precinct was an 11-minute journey of suffocating silence. Branning kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Most people he arrested were screaming by now, banging on the glass, cursing or sobbing. The man in the back sat perfectly still, his eyes closed, his head leaning back against the seat. He looked like he was meditating. It unnerved Branning more than the screaming would have. He turned up the radio to drown out the silence, but the static only made it worse. Behind them, Jamal was following in the Jaguar, keeping a safe distance, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were ashen. He was on speakerphone with Robert Henderson, the family's lawyer and a civil rights litigator of national renown. He cuffed him, Mr. Henderson, for nothing. Dad was just standing there. Inside the cruiser, Branning tried to justify the arrest in his head. He was belligerent. He refused to identify. He made a move toward me. He was already writing the report in his mind using the standard boilerplate language that had protected him before. Furtive movements, aggressive stance, fear for officer safety. It always worked. They pulled into the station's sally port. The heavy metal doors rolled down behind them, sealing them in the concrete bay. Branning hauled Marcus out of the car. Let's go. Watch your head. They walked into the processing area. It was a busy afternoon. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports. At the booking desk sat Sergeant Tom Miller, a man with 30 years on the force, a man who was counting down the days to his pension. Miller didn't look up immediately. He was signing a property release form. Got a refusal to comply obstruction, Branning announced, pushing Marcus toward the counter. Guy thinks he's a lawyer. Sergeant Miller looked up. His pen stopped moving. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He blinked as if his eyes were deceiving him. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the noise of the room. Marcus? Miller asked, his voice trembling. Judge Thorne looked at the sergeant with a weary expression. Hello, Tom. I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit late for the charity gala this weekend. Branning looked between them. You know this guy, Sarge? Miller walked around the desk. He didn't look at Branning. He looked at the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists. Get those off him, Miller said. It wasn't a shout. It was a hiss of pure terror. What Sarge? He was... I said get those damn cuffs off him right now. Miller roared, his face turning beet red. The entire booking room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Do you have any idea who this is? This is Judge Marcus Thorne. He presides over the juvenile court. He signs your search warrants. He's the reason half the funding for our youth diversion program exists. Branning felt the blood drain from his face. His hands felt numb as he reached for his key. He fumbled with the lock, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. The click of the cuffs unlocking seemed to echo like a gunshot. Marcus rubbed his wrists. He didn't look at Branning. He looked at Miller. Tom, I'm going to need your body camera footage. I need the dashcam footage. I need the dispatch logs showing there was no call. And I need this officer's personnel file preserved immediately. Consider this a verbal preservation order. The written one will arrive within the hour." "Of course, Judge," Miller said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'll call the chief. Come to my office. Please." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I will wait in the lobby like any other citizen until my attorney arrives. I want everything documented. I want the booking photo you were about to take. Process me, Officer Branning. Finish what you started." Branning stood there, the handcuffs dangling from his finger, looking at a man who suddenly seemed 10 feet tall. I didn't know," Branning stammered. "The Constitution doesn't apply only to people you know, officer," Marcus said. The chief of police arrived 12 minutes later, buttoning his uniform jacket as he ran through the lobby. He found Judge Thorne sitting calmly on a plastic bench next to his son Jamal, who had arrived and was holding a bottle of water for his father. Attorney Henderson was already there, speaking in low, furious tones to the lieutenant on duty. "Judge Thorne," the chief said, breathless, "I cannot express how sorry I am. This is a misunderstanding of colossal proportions. You are free to go, obviously. We can expunge the arrest record immediately." "You will do no such thing," Marcus said, standing up. "That arrest record is evidence, and this was not a misunderstanding, Chief. This was a violation of civil rights based on racial bias. If I were a 19-year-old boy without a title, I would currently be in a holding cell, or worse, I might have been tased for holding a textbook. Your officer pulled a weapon on my son." The chief flinched. He did what? He drew a taser on a college student for walking out of a house, Marcus said. "I am filing a federal lawsuit under Section 1983. I am alleging false arrest, excessive force, and malicious prosecution. But more importantly, I am going to expose the culture in your department that allowed Officer Branning to feel comfortable doing this." The investigation was swift, brutal, and public. Judge Thorne didn't need the money, but he needed the truth. The lawsuit forced the department to turn over 5 years of Officer Branning's stop-and-frisk data. The analysis performed by independent experts was damning. It revealed that while the town's population was only 12% black, 60% of Branning's traffic stops involved black drivers. He was 4 times more likely to search a black man's car than a white man's, despite finding contraband less often. The suspicious person reports he filed were almost exclusively against minorities in affluent neighborhoods. The video from the neighbor's phone leaked to the press. It showed the serene, leafy street. It showed the calm, articulate judge. It showed the aggressive, shouting officer. And it showed the moment Branning pointed a weapon at Jamal. The video was viewed 20 million times in 3 days. The comments section wasn't just angry. It was a collective realization. People saw exactly what Marcus had warned about the arrogance of unchecked power. Branning was placed on administrative leave, but the union couldn't save him. The evidence was too overwhelming. The bad apple defense crumbled when the internal affairs report showed that 2 previous complaints against Branning for similar behavior had been dismissed by his supervisors without a proper interview. 6 weeks later, the termination hearing was a formality. Kyle Branning was fired. The state licensing board revoked his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. During his final statement, Branning tried to claim he was following his training. The disciplinary board chair looked at him and said, "If this was your training, then the whole system is rot. But the video shows it wasn't training Mr. Branning. It was you." The city settled the lawsuit for $1.8 million to avoid a trial that would have destroyed their reputation further. Judge Thorne didn't keep a dime. He announced the creation of the Thorne Jamal Legal Defense and Scholarship Fund. The money would go toward full-ride law school scholarships for young men and women from underrepresented communities and a legal defense wing for citizens wrongfully accused of crimes by the police. On a crisp autumn morning 3 months after the arrest, Judge Marcus Thorne walked into his courtroom. The bailiff shouted, "All rise!" The room stood. Marcus ascended the bench, his black robe flowing around him, the same robe he had earned the right to wear through decades of excellence. The same robe that couldn't protect him from being profiled in a parking spot. He sat down and looked out at the courtroom. He saw the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the scared teenagers awaiting their hearings. He looked at them differently now. He understood the fear in their eyes, not just intellectually, but viscerally. He remembered the cold steel of the handcuffs and the smell of the cage. "Be seated," Judge Thorne said. His voice was steady, but there was a new depth to it, a gravity born of experience. The incident hadn't broken him. It had sharpened him. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a weapon for justice. He looked at the first case file. A young man 18 arrested for disorderly conduct after asking an officer why he was being stopped. Marcus looked at the prosecutor. "Counselor," he said, "before we begin, I want to see the body camera footage, and I want to hear the articulable reasonable suspicion for the initial stop. If you don't have it, I suggest you move to dismiss right now." The prosecutor paused, looked at the judge's unyielding expression, and looked down at his file. "The state moves to dismiss, Your Honor." "Granted," Marcus said. The gavel came down. It was the sound of accountability. Moral of the story. True authority doesn't come from a badge or a gun. It comes from integrity knowledge and the restraint to use power wisely. When those in power allow bias to guide their actions, they don't just violate the law, they erode the trust that holds society together. Judge Thorne's story reminds us that titles and suits don't protect us from prejudice, but knowing our rights and standing firm can turn a personal injustice into a victory for the community. We must build a system where you don't need to be a judge to be treated with basic human dignity. What do you think? Was the $1.8 million settlement enough for the humiliation the judge and his son endured? Do you think Officer Branning realized his mistake, or was he just sorry he got caught? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice and accountability.